I did my undergraduate with Motley Crue and did my graduate studies with the Rolling Stones. So I generally start off these conversations by picking on a few people and saying, what did you do in 1985?
Having our 6th child.
85? Steve?
Working for
Presidential Airways. I was working for Motley Crue. So, I came from Ireland, and I grew up in Ireland in the 60s and 70s, and it was a difficult place and a difficult time. And we had an interesting view of ourselves, and the view we had of ourselves was that was our lot in life, and that's what we would do, and that's where we'd go. And I wasn't particularly good at school, and you'll be happy to know I didn't bring a PowerPoint, and I don't use notes. The PowerPoint I would have brought if I was bringing a PowerPoint would show a report card with lots of D's on it. And I was kept back, and I wasn't considered to be very bright, and I wasn't considered to be very smart, and I was considered to be rather stupid and dumb. And that had certainly an impact on me. So as I got a bit older, I vowed to escape. I would escape parochial Ireland, and I'd get out, and I'd survive, and I'd do something. And it's really, really interesting where one gets one's inspiration, but I think inspiration is very important. So you can see beyond where you're from and where you can go. And I had two people who were very inspirational to me, and nothing to do with academia, and nothing to do with politics, but one was a fellow called Phil Lynott. Does anybody know who Phil Lynott was? If you're old, you can't say so. Well, he was pardon? Thank you. Excellent. Phil Lynott was a African American in Ireland. He was one of one, and in the 60s and 70s, and he had a band called Thin Lizzy, and they went on to be very, very well known internationally. And so that, for me, growing up, was beyond Ireland. Right? Here's a African American from Ireland, and he's an international rock star. He was extremely cool. He bought me a pint of beer once, and it was like this, you know, he had a thick Dublin accent. Hey, John, would you like a pint? I said, yeah, Phil Lynott. Of course I'll have a pint. I'll have several. So, very nice man. So he was a huge inspiration to sort of how you can get from here to there. Because sometimes it's really important to understand you can actually go from here to there, and how do you get from here to there. And if there's somebody there, it sort of makes it easier that you can identify with. So Phil Lynott was one, and the second was a farmer. The farmer's name was Billy Coleman, and he was a rally driver, raced cars. And in 1974, Billy Coleman pulled a car out of a ditch. Now, a ditch would be a hedgerow. And he pulled a car out of a ditch, and he rebuilt it with his brother, and he rebuilt it with his friend of theirs. And they put it on a trailer, and they went to England in 1974. Now, does anybody have any concept of what it was like to be Irish in England in 1974? Any idea? Thank you. Not good at all. So this farmer from the west of Cork went to England in 1974 with a car, himself and his brother and their friend built in a shed. And they went to compete in the RAC Championship, which was very proper English series of races. And they were up against the factory-supported teams. And in a true David and Goliath story, they won. They won the championship. And this is unheard of, never been done since. And for me growing up, that was, wow, these guys can go there and they can go into England. And going from Ireland to England in 1974 was a tough place to be. The IRA were blowing up places in England. They were shooting people. It was a bad situation. It was a bad time. We were killing each other in Northern Ireland. And it was difficult, and it was extremely difficult to be Irish and to be in England. But to be Irish, to be in England, to win an English championship was phenomenal. So this was what led me to see, wow, you can go from here to there. You can actually do this. So I didn't do particularly well in school. We discussed that already. And in 1984, June 6th, I landed in Los Angeles, California with $26 in my pocket. And I didn't know much of anything. So, is anybody here from Los Angeles? Anybody been to Los Angeles? Where's the one place you don't go when you get to LA? Not Compton, that's another story. I had an office in Compton. Where's the one place you don't go? Downtown, especially back in 1984. Yeah, so I went to downtown Los Angeles. Now, I've only begun to sort of tell this part of the story because it's a little gritty. I didn't have but $26. And I got in on a Saturday and had a bit of a job interview. And my version of a job interview was, just I'll come by and see you on Monday. That was my idea of a job interview. I invited myself to go see somebody on a Monday. So I got in there on a Saturday, so on a Sunday, rather. So I had $26 and I couldn't afford a hotel. So I literally slept on a cardboard box behind a hotel on the evening of June 6, 1984, and got woken up with a cockroach crawling across my face. And so I wasn't about to call my parents, because my parents didn't have much, didn't have a return ticket, so there was no choice but to succeed, or certainly to survive. So first to succeed, you have to survive. So I did that, and I jumped in a taxi, and I went to Compton, California. 1220 Kona Drive in Compton, California. It was a rock and roll lighting company. And I went in, and I says, are you Eric Pierce, the fellow who owned the place? And he says, I am. And I says, I need a job. So I'll fill out the paperwork, give us a call next week. And I said, no, you don't understand. I need a job. So long story short, they gave me a job. So I was 20 years old, didn't know much about anything, but figured I could do this rock and roll lighting thing. How difficult could it be? Anyway, I did that, and I turned that into a very successful career. And I turned that into a very successful career, not because I'm particularly smart, not that I'm particularly good at anything, but I'd recognized a couple of things early on. If you've got ambition, and you've got a hard work, and you've got a work ethic, you will succeed. Especially if you like what you're doing, you can succeed. And I have a couple of very, very basic things I live my life by. It's very important to do the right thing. And we'll get into that in a second. Very, very important to do the right thing. That's kind of important. Very, very important to do what you say you will do. Very, very important. And that goes for showing up on time. That goes for everything in your life. And the trouble with doing what you say you will do, sometimes doing what you say you will do becomes the most difficult thing you will ever do. Think about that for a second. You said you would do something, now you actually have to do it. And sometimes that's difficult, and sometimes that takes your time, sometimes that takes your money, sometimes that takes a lot. Doing what you say you will do is very, very, very important. Another thing that's very important is to be, ambition is important, but to be assertive without being arrogant. Assertive without being arrogant. And I'll pull this whole various things together as we go through this chat. Assertive, but not being arrogant. Being humble is important, but if you're humble, you need to also be assertive. So let's pull all that together. So I'm doing this rock and roll thing. I'm out with Motley Crue and doing lights and all this kind of carry on, and we'd go into these venues and there wouldn't be enough electricity. So the promoter would call up a local rental company, and they'd show up with an engine on the back of a truck, and it might work, it might not work. So I said to myself, before I knew what this meant, I said, well, the customer expectation is quite low. No idea what that meant. What it meant was, if the machine blew up, it was actually a mark of success for the rock and roll band. You know, Boise, Idaho, we just blew up the building. It was cool, especially if you're Motley Crue or Van Halen or somebody. So I said, there's got to be a better way to do this, and this has got to make sense. So the next tour I ended up doing was David Bowie. Now we're in 1987. I've been doing this rock and roll thing for 3 years. Now I'm working for David Bowie. And it was the David Bowie Glass Spider tour, and I was a lighting guy, which meant that we put up lights and we took lights down. So I was walking around backstage in Manchester, and it was July, and it's 1987, and I'm walking around backstage, and the big stage is built into the stadium seats in Manchester. And I'm walking around, and I saw this big box of wires where the power was coming in to this junction box and distributed out. And the thing was beginning to smoke, and it was 7 o'clock in the afternoon, 7 o'clock in the evening rather, and the show was starting at 7:30. So this is the assertive bit. So I said, well, this is a bad job. Somebody's got to do something. So I was 1987. Now I'm 24 years old. So I went to see the production manager. I said, We've got to turn this off. We've got to fix it. Now, this is all the chips stacked on black 33. Moved them all across to black 33. This is it. This is the whole thing. So I proceeded to chop, cut, and splice this distribution box back together again. I started to look over my shoulder, and in the stands, leaning against a railing, was David Bowie, his manager, Coco Schwab, a fellow called Michael Ahern, a fellow called Benny Collins, and a fellow called Keith Bradley. I was like, whoa, this is a little bit of pressure here. So I managed to get it together, managed to fix it, and everything's good. Pop show is happening, 5 minutes to midnight, it's all good. So 25 past 7, thumbs up, they're walking on stage. And I get a pat in the back from David saying, fine job, and everybody else is happy and the show is happening. And that was the defining point of that particular stage of my life. If I hadn't done that and taken that huge risk, I would never have been recognized for somebody who can make things happen. If I had done it and it had failed, that would have been the end of that, and there would have been no pop show. And I went back to my hotel room that night after we put everything in trucks and it went away, and I got a bottle of wine, and there was a handwritten note from David Bowie, which I still have, that said, thanks for saving the show, David. And there was a bottle of wine, and got some of my friends that came over to my hotel room, and we had this bottle of wine, didn't know anything, so opened it and shoved the cork into it, and we proceeded to drink this bottle of wine, and I found out later it was a bottle of 1966 Petrus, which was probably a $1,000 bottle of wine at the time. But I'm 24 years old, what do I know? So, Benny Collins went on to be the production manager for Michael Jackson. Michael Ahern went on to be the production manager for the Rolling Stones. Keith Bradley went on to be the production manager from everybody from Elton John to a whole slew of other people. And that was the beginning of a career. And I started a company called Show Power, and Show Power supplied power generation to the rock and roll business. And we took something that was kind of a bit of a mishmash, and we put some process around it, and we put a bit of technology around it, and we were doing the 5 nines before everybody knew what the 5 nines were. So 99.99% reliability, and then +1 multiple redundant systems before anybody knew what that was. So that business was all about integrity. Now I'm saying rock and roll, and I'm saying integrity, and people are looking at me. They always look at me. The most honest business I've ever been involved in, the business with the highest level of integrity, and the business with the highest level of trust has been the rock and roll business. Absolutely true story. One of these guys would call you up and you'd ship millions of dollars of equipment across the world. You'd incur hundreds of thousands of dollars of cost based on somebody shaking your hand. We never did contracts. Took too long, didn't do contracts. And it was very, very interesting business where your word was literally your bond. And that's changed over the years, but it was a very, very interesting thing, which suited me well because, as I said before, do what you say you'll do. So here we are, we got this business, and I decided how to make a bit of money out of this. And it was quite good. It was kind of a sexy business. Rolling Stones, U2, Michael Jackson, Madonna, it sounds great, right? But there's not a lot of money in it. So I decided in 1998, I took it public. Because in 1998, you could probably take a shoe public in New York. You could take anything public. So I took it public. So that was my first foray into the public markets. And I was dealing with a lot of interesting people in New York City and a lot of interesting people. That was my first foray into that. So we took a company public. And the reason I took the company public was I took the company public to paint a big, big bullseye on the company. In other words, I wanted it to be bought. And it's easier for somebody to buy a public company than to buy a private company. Because a private company, who knows what's going on? I'm paying my brother, my aunt, my uncle. They're buying my car. They're paying my housekeeper. They're paying my cell phone. They're paying my vacation. They're paying everything else. Well, luckily enough, my business, I'd always ran it extremely transparent. And I'd never had the company pay for anything. And as you guys go forward in life, take this away with you tonight. If you ever start a business, never have the company pay any of your personal expenses. It's the number one thing. I buy and sell companies a bit now, and it's the number one thing, Steve, we look for. Steve and myself just bought a company in Ireland, and it's one of these things you look for. You start looking through it, and you say, hold on a second. Well, the daughter works for the company, and the wife works for the company, and the company's paying this, and the company pays that. So all the red flags go up, and the red flags are pretty much true. So take that away as a sort of as a takeaway, put it in the back of your head and say, okay, that's interesting, we'll keep an eye on that. So, what had happened? I sold the company. And I sold it to General Electric. So I sold a rock and roll company to Jack Welch. And if anybody knows the history of Jack Welch, reads Jack's books, they're all quite good. Neutron Jack. Jack was a hard man. So I sold a rock and roll company to Jack Welch, which is probably the best sales job I've ever done in my entire life, aside from convincing my wife she should marry me, but that was a bigger sales job. But I sold a business to General Electric. So I sold the business to General Electric, and that was rather interesting. And here's me working at General Electric. Now, bear in mind, back to the intro, didn't quite finish high school, didn't do particularly well, didn't go to college. And of course, they were not acceptance of my Motley Crue undergrad and my Rolling Stones MBA. They were not accepting of that. So I went to work at the General Electric company. And that was interesting. And that lasted 18 months. The problem was I was actually good at what I was doing, and it was during the California power crisis, and I was moving a lot of product, and I was doing very well. But they didn't quite know what to make of me. And so we parted ways, and I went to work for a French company and doing the similar thing. So I bought that company in 1984. And this is where the story gets really, really interesting. So I bought this company in 1984, and that I was working for before it went bankrupt. And I started that company, supply power generation on a global basis. Power generation to countries, cities, very large scale, on a very temporary basis. And started that company in 1984, March 16th. I wanted to close the deal on March 17th, but everything conspired against me and I couldn't do that. Thought an Irish guy closing a deal on March 17th would be quite good. Didn't quite work out that way. Anyway, really, really fast. I took that business from $0 to $500 million in revenue in 10 years. I took that business from an equity standpoint, in other words, what the equity was worth. I took it from 2008 to 2012, from 100 million, 250, 450, a billion to $1.7 billion in 4 years. Took a business that was worth 100 million and took it to 1.7 billion in approximately 4.5 years. Bit of luck in there somewhere. But did a lot of deals. I had lots of private equity partners, some interesting, some not so interesting. Some of them certainly would be household words. Madeleine Albright was a private equity investor in my company. George Soros was a private equity investor in my company for about 5 minutes until we figured him out. That ended badly. In any event, I ended up taking the company public in the UK, which was a good idea at the time because we got a huge valuation. But back to my 1974 story, Irish guy, UK, didn't quite work out as well as it should have. And what ended up happening was very successful business. And I stepped away from the business in August of 2014. And the business fell off a cliff. It literally fell off a cliff. It went from approximately $500 million of revenue to $238 million of revenue. And can anybody tell me what happens when your business goes from $500 million of revenue to $238 million of revenue? What happens to your debt? That way. So I spent the next year putting together a group of investors, and I took the company private. And I've spent the last 2 years fixing it. I should have stayed there. It wouldn't have been fixed, but anyway, it's another story. So the whole thing about it was I've raised a lot of money, I've created a lot of wealth, sold businesses, bought businesses, and we were having a conversation earlier. I'm going to put a few people on the spot. You, sir, what's the most expensive dollar? The last one. And what I mean by that, and this is why we're all here at Catholic, we like to talk about transparency, we like to talk about accountability, and we like to talk about having a pretty straightforward moral compass and doing business the right way. The last dollar is the most expensive dollar. Because if you're in a negotiation with somebody or anybody, and you're the guy who wants that last dollar because you want to win, and you think you're going to win by taking the last dollar, You may get the last dollar and you may think you win, but you lose. And I've seen enough people fight for the last dollar, and every time you fight for that last dollar and you get it, you don't win, you leave a bit of your soul on the table. So you've ended up with no soul. The last dollar, leave it on the table. It's the right thing to do. You get the best deal possible, and you can do business with the people again. George Soros's people wanted the last dollar. And you don't want the last dollar. You want to do business, and you want to do business, and you want to be able to go back and do business with the same people again. You want people to say, you know what, he's not a bad guy. A bit quirky, a bit strange. Not so sure about him sometimes, but he'll never take the last dollar. The last dollar is the most expensive dollar, and you literally leave your soul on the table. And we don't want to be known about that. You want to be known as a person with integrity. You want to be known as a person who is transparent. You want to be known as a person who's got a very straightforward moral compass. Most of the people who do business with me know exactly what I stand for. Exactly, 100%. There's never a conversation. They know exactly who I am. And they know what I will do, they know what I won't do, and they know I make a deal, and I'll shake their hand, and that'll be the deal. And the lawyers will take care of everything else. And that's really, really important, because I was able to put together a lot of money to take this company private based on the fact that I had a reputation. And my reputation was honesty, integrity, and doing what I said I would do. So people are prepared to invest in that. People, when you're buying or selling companies, everybody gets out the ledger, and everybody gets the balance sheet, and we all look at it, and we do all this fantastic stuff and figuring it all out. People do business with people. At the end of the day, that's what happens. People are doing business with people. People are doing business with people they want to do business with. People are doing business with people they want to trust. People are doing business with people who have the same set of values as them. And that's the people you want to do business with. People you can trust. People you can call at 5 o'clock on a Monday morning, 5 a.m., and say, hey, we got to do this. What do you think? And they'll take your phone call because they know who you are. And as you go through your career, you're going to meet people who want the last dollar, and you're going to meet people who don't want the last dollar. And I would encourage everybody, leave that dollar on the table, because that dollar will ultimately make you a lot more money than taking that dollar, because it will leave you with a sense of doing the right thing. I have no problem sleeping at night, none whatsoever. I'm involved in a lot of charities, I'm involved in the university here, and I sleep very well. And the reason I sleep very well is I have probably done wrong by people, but I've tried to go back and fix it if I have. And and I do wrong by people all day, every day. But you can't intentionally do wrong by people. You have to do business the right way. And there is certainly business is a very noble endeavor for the right reasons, and it's not for the wrong reasons. Making money for the right reasons is important. It keeps the economy going. We provide jobs. People come into my office, and I bump into them in the warehouse and say, John, I just got a new house, got a mortgage. And I'm very happy for them, and then I take a sense of, I've got to make sure I do the right thing. Now, his family is depending on me, and these are important things to do the right thing. And if you start taking that last dollar, you're jeopardizing, your soul, and that sounds kind of heavy-duty stuff, bit of Bible thumping, bit of fire and brimstone, but I really, really, really believe that. The takeaways I want everybody to take away with you today are, don't take the last dollar. Do what you say you will do. Be confident, don't be arrogant. Have a correct moral compass. Visualize where you're going to be, and if you do the right thing, you'll get there. Look at somebody who's driven that path and see, okay, they got there. It doesn't matter if it's academia, it doesn't matter if it's sports, it doesn't matter what it is. If you can visualize where it is, you can get there. If you kind of don't know where you're going, you're kind of going to have a hard time getting there. And I'm blessed. I'm the Irish guy that came to this country with 26 bucks. Not a lot of education, but I have two things that stood me my entire life. I have a mother and father that loved me and encouraged me, didn't understand me, but loved me and encouraged me nonetheless. And the other thing I have is I have a deep faith. That is really bizarre. I actually turned this thing off. I have a deep faith. I grew up in Irish Catholic Ireland, and that unto itself is several stories. You could do a series of lectures on that. But I was off down the wrong road on several different times in my life, and what brought me back to the right road was the religion I grew up with. And I think that's important. It's a good basis, it's a good foundation, and it helps you with not taking the last dollar, doing what you say you will do, being assertive, not being arrogant. And that sort of concludes my my chat.
Well, thank you so much. That was phenomenal. Of course, you know what we teach here and why we teach this whole idea of business being people-centered. And you were just talking about all the reasons that that works out so well. And so thank you so much. How about some questions? We have a couple of microphones that will run their way to you.
There's extra credit for asking questions.
All right, we have this.
I loved your biography, but you skipped a few steps, right?
Which ones?
So how do you pick up the financial chops to do a public offering for a company? We are here in the business school.
That's a great story, and I'll tell that story real fast. The only class I was actually good at, in Ireland, if you wanted to be an accountant, you left school at 16, and you became an apprentice. So the couple of grades before that taught you commerce, and commerce was rudimentary bookkeeping. It was accounts receivable, it was accounts payable, it was balance sheet, trial balances, and it was literally ledgers and bookkeeping. And I had a very good teacher, and it was the only class I actually did reasonably well in, and his name was Gabriel Byrne. And not Gabriel Byrne, he's the actor, Gabriel Desmond. And over the years, I wanted to reach out to this teacher and say thank you. And I wanted to reach out to this teacher and say thank you in a way that he would understand sort of that I was successful. And back to my original thing, don't be arrogant. So how do you do that? So long story short, I ended up buying a Gulfstream. And I was looking online at the various pictures of this Gulfstream, and I came across a guy who takes pictures of airplanes. There's a whole universe of people who take pictures of airplanes. And this particular gentleman, and I saw it, and I sent him an email, and I said, are you the Gabriel Desmond that taught commerce in Coláiste Creastri in Cork? And he says, I am. And I says, I'm John Campion, and I'm coming into Cork next week, and I gave him the tail number. So I landed, and he was taking pictures, and we got to say what we needed to say without saying anything, which was an interesting story. So yes, so commerce, rudimentary bookkeeping is how I sort of put that together. Busy with the Rolling Stones, busy with Motley Crue, busy having fun, I suppose. But I think you probably need a high school diploma to sort of do that.
Steve, did you have something? Okay, good. I'm wondering about your whole career with cars and how that started. And
Well, cars are just a complete obsession. I'm signing up for a 12-step program, and I'm checking myself into a rehab next week for that one. Look, I grew up in Ireland, and pretty poor place, and looking at magazines and cars. And if you're really bored sometimes, I've got this whole other life in cars, and just Google John Campion cars, and there's more stuff on YouTube than you can shake a stick at. They're mechanical, they're all sorts of different things, and I'm probably, in terms of my wife, my family, and then probably cars. Somebody said to me once, why are you in business? And I said, so I can afford more cars.
very good. Other questions?
What, that waking up in the morning thinking you're a complete failure and everybody's going to find out that you actually don't know what you're doing? That feeling? Absolutely. So, September 1988, Philadelphia, Rolling Stones Steel Wheels tour. They hadn't toured for 10 years. Third song was Shattered. Keith Richards goes downstage center, does this, there's nothing. The lighting guy blacks everything out. Massive power failure for the first show the Rolling Stones did in 10 years. I'm under the stage trying to figure this out, and I turn around, and there's Mick Jagger, literally 3 inches from my face, screaming at me, not to make him blah, 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 blah. Anyway, long story short, yes, I wanted to go back to Ireland. Yes, I wanted to crawl into a hole. Yes, I thought I'd never fix this. Yes, I thought my career was over. And that's a recurring nightmare forever. Look, everybody has these, you wake up and you think, oh, I'm not really that good at anything, and somebody's going to find out and it'll be a big laugh. I'm a big fraud. Look, we all have those, right? And you got to sort of power through that. And so again, it's all back to assertive without being arrogant. Arrogance is a terrible thing. Arrogance is a shocking thing, because the day you become arrogant is the day you're going to fail. And the day you become arrogant is the day that things start going wrong. And I think so when I talk about being assertive without being arrogant, the little bit in the middle is called humility, and trying to be humble and trying to recognize where you came from and recognize that there's a bit of talent, but a lot of luck and a lot of hard work that goes into it.
Very good. Other questions?
Hi. I'm wondering, how did you balance investors and management when you took the company public?
There you go. Investors and management. Investors are a very interesting bunch of people. When everything is going great, they're absolutely fantastic. They'll take you to dinner and have a great time. When things sort of go around the back way, not so much. Look, that's an ongoing difficulty. It's how do you build a business and manage the business and manage investors at the same time. Very, very difficult. You're managing expectations. You're in a public market. You're giving guidance as to what you think the company will do without telling them what the company's going to do. So managing and guidance, very difficult. Again, if you sort of go back to what my sort of very basic philosophy is, I kind of think I worked through it that way. Look, I had a bad day for me was I was called in front of the English version of the SEC. I was hauled in before them in London one day. And they contacted me, and there wasn't any choice, you showed up. And I was getting grilled, and there was a whole insider trading thing. The whole insider trading thing came about, as I figured this out through the thing, from a hedge fund guy in New York. And he tended to be buying the stock at a higher price before the end of the quarter, push the stock up. And he wasn't doing it for my benefit, he was doing it for his own benefit. And these particular investigators in the UK were thinking I was doing it. So I was hauled in to be questioned. Anyway, long story short, we ended up sorting the whole thing out, and there was no issue about it. But, you know, that's a sleepless night. And, you know, your job is not to tell any investor anything that the broader public doesn't know. And that becomes a difficult situation. And if you're a bit of a people pleaser, kind of like this guy, you kind of would say, this is going to be fine. But difficult, so you gotta manage your way in that one, or you'll wake up one morning wearing an orange suit. So difficult. So I went back, took it private, went back, and worked probably harder than I've ever done in my entire life. And why did I go back to fix a company I'd left? It's kind of the interesting question, right? And that was a bit of hubris, probably. That was a bit of me not wanting my legacy, the company I founded, go bang. So I went back to fix it and put an enormous amount of time into it. And I discovered that a lot of what I thought had been going the right way when I was there was not particularly going the right way. And I discovered a lot of things that weren't particularly good. And we have about 950 people working for the company around the world. And in Jacksonville, Florida, there's about 150. So I took a chainsaw to about 70 of them and replaced them. And that was not interesting. If you really want to have a laugh sometimes, read Glassdoor about me. Read Glassdoor about me, it's really humorous. And it's not so humorous. Look, at the end of the day, the only people who write on Glassdoor are people who are not particularly happy. So if I'm actually employing somebody and I look at the company they worked for, I'll do the Glassdoor. And the worse the Glassdoor is, the better the person is. So when you're in management down the road and you're looking out there in the real world and you're getting a job and you look up Glassdoor, nobody ever writes the letter to say, great job. Everybody writes the letter and say, I was treated badly. So anyway, if you're really bored, look at me at Glassdoor. It's fabulous. I'm a really bad person. But look, I changed the management and I changed everything. And I just actually, we were talking about this earlier, and I'll take 2 minutes to tell a great story. I tapped into something I never knew existed. I tapped into probably one of the greatest team of managers I've ever come across in my entire life. Retired military. I've now got 6 or 7 colonels working for me and a whole pile of command sergeant majors. And these are guys who went into the military at 16 and 17, not West Point guys, and worked their way through, got sent to college, and came out the back end as colonels. And these guys, talk about guys who get stuff done. I mean, unbelievable. So we employed a lot of those guys. But the other thing we did, really fast story, Puerto Rico, bad hurricane. Really, really, really bad. And the hurricane came in on a Wednesday into a Thursday. And I went to Puerto Rico on the Monday, and I went there with my partners at General Electric. And in fact, it was the last charter General Electric ever did. It was the last company, it was the last General Electric jet that ever flew because they got rid of the jets the next day. So I went to Puerto Rico with a couple of GE guys and one of our salespeople. And we're trying to figure it out. We saw the governor, we saw Prepo. How do we fix this? How do we do this? This is a really bad situation. And we try to begin to work it out. And a huge amount of Army Corps of Engineers, huge amount of FEMA people, huge amount of bureaucracy, and just lots of nothing happening. So how do we break through this? So I left with the GE guys, and we left this salesperson behind. And this salesperson absolutely sorted it out, and we ended up signing a very large contract with the Army Corps of Engineers, funded by FEMA, and we turned the lights back on in several places in Puerto Rico. We built the fastest power plant we ever built in 15 days, and we turned the lights back on in Puerto Rico. The person we left behind was 26-year-old, and her name was Libby Owen. It was a girl. Unbelievable, talented girl. And the previous administration, when I left, fired her. One of the first things I did when I got back was rehire her. And she came to Puerto Rico, and she certainly exemplifies what I believe in. She'll push forward, but she's not arrogant. And she's got a great way about her, and she signed over a $100 million contract with us in PREPA. That's why it happened. And I had learned to step back and let a 26-year-old girl do this, which was probably the most difficult thing I've ever done in my entire life. But she did it, and she made it happen. And we had a bunch of military guys come in and make it happen. So I ended up looking at things different. I looked at the business, what was right, what was wrong, how do we fix it, where the talent is. And sometimes emotion, sometimes people who want to work, sometimes people who want to reach, sometimes people who want to do, that just raw, not ambition in a bad way, but ambition in a good way. That want to get it done is what you need. And she worked there, and she got to know everybody in the command center. She got to know everybody, and as a result of that, we were able to put a deal together to help the people of Puerto Rico and help my business at the same time. Thank you.
To balance your professional and personal life?
That is the big difference. That's the big issue, right? That's that balance, right? That's how do you get that balance? And we were just talking about that earlier. Look, I'm married to a wonderful woman who, which I did say earlier, was the best sales job I ever did in my entire life. She's understanding of me. She used to have her own business, and I had probably a fantastic year, 14 into 15, because I'd walked away from a business, and it probably cost the shareholders $1 billion, but I was really happy because I was home with my wife. And the deal we made was I'd go back and fix this, and I'd put in 2 years, and that clock is just about run out, but I've done what I said I would do. I'd fix the business. So I'm sitting down with my partners next week, and we're going to have a hard conversation because I want to go back to what I really want to do, which is be with my wife and be with my kids and just enjoy life, right? Because we got kids now who are beginning to look at colleges, right? And I want to be part of that. I don't want to miss that. And sometimes a big mistake is I'll go be successful, and my kids would rather me be successful. so we've got money and we can have nice vacations, then we take them to school. Now, your kids want you to take them to school. Your kids want you to take them to school. So getting that balance is very, very important. And that's kind of why, you're going to come out of here and you're all going to get jobs and you're going to work really hard. And that's the time when you do all that and you get that, you work hard, and then you can have that right balance. But getting that balance is probably the most difficult thing there is, right? My calendar is out of control. I have no idea what I'm doing half the time. I literally wake up, where am I? This week, I don't know what I'm doing this week. I don't know what I was doing last week. I'm supposed to be in Ireland next week, and I'm not going to be there, and I'm supposed to be here, and I'm not there. It's crazy. My calendar is absolutely mental. I sit down on a Sunday with my wife, and we sort of try and take 2 calendars of the kids and herself and try and do this, which is very difficult. And that's extremely stressful. And because you don't want to say no to your kids. You don't want to say no to your wife. You don't want to say, no, I can't make it home for dinner. Right? That doesn't feel good, does it? So again, when you sit there and you sort of convince yourself, I'm working really hard and I'll take them on vacation, it'll be fabulous. Not so much. Get that balance, I think, is important.
Want to talk a little bit about your calendar here in Washington over the next couple of days?
Oh, Lord. I'm actually, so when I was growing up, we talked about Ireland earlier. When I was growing up in Ireland, the Irish Prime Minister, who's called a Taoiseach, incidentally, the Irish Prime Minister historically comes to D.C. around St. Patrick's Day. Historically, for as long as I can possibly remember, probably back to 1921 or something. In any event, he always goes to the White House, and he always takes 3 or 4 Irish businessmen with him, and himself, the Irish Prime Minister, whoever that may be, and the President, whoever that may be, and these 3 or 4 Irish businessmen sort of sit around and have this conversation. And that was on TV when I was growing up. That was always a big deal. And I got invited to that this year. So I'm with the Irish Prime Minister and going to the White House. And one of my liberal friends says to me, John, you're not going, are you? And I said, hold on a second. I was invited by the Irish Prime Minister, by the President of the United States, to go to the White House. Of course I'm going. Not making that mistake. So yeah, I'm doing that. So I'm involved with the Irish Prime Minister at several different things this week down here. And then I'm flying back early Friday morning, and we've got a Catholic University Board of Visitors board meeting on Friday. So if I get out of here fast enough and don't drink too much Guinness, it'll be all good. So yes, I think that's what we're doing.
Maybe one last question, if there is one. Go ahead.
Prime Minister of Yemen. Prime Minister of Yemen. I was with the French company called Alstom, and I was in London, and I was at the Mayfair Hotel, and we're negotiating the building of a 350 megawatt power plant just outside Sana'a in Yemen. And I was there with a couple of finance guys, and we're putting this deal together. And it was probably 350, 400 million, and long-term service agreement of probably $55 to $60 million a year for 20 years. Big piece of business. So I'm sitting there, Prime Minister of Yemen, Minister of Energy, a few other people. The Prime Minister of Yemen takes his business card, and on the back he writes $7MPA, signs it and slides it over to me. He wanted $7 million a year for the 20 years that the contract was going to go, and that was his ask. I got up, very politely, said to the finance guy, listen, let's take a step outside, and I literally was gone. That was it. Literally, didn't say goodbye, didn't say anything, was gone. For all I know, it was, somebody trying to catch me on tape agreeing to it. But yes, in some parts of the world, that's acceptable. And for him, that was very acceptable. He wanted $7 million per annum. And I was working for a French company that was probably okay with that. I wasn't okay with that. Foreign Trade Corruption Act, you go to jail. And I work in a business that we do business all over the world, and there's a lot of that. And I've never paid anybody off because it's a very, very slippery slope. Some people will talk about corruption, and somebody will say, sure, it's not so bad. Sure, it just means it'll just cost a little bit more. Corruption kills more deals than it makes happen. Corruption kills economies. Corruption kills deals. Corruption has been the bane of the African economy and the South American economy forever. Argentina almost disappeared unto itself. Argentina was a huge economy. And over the last 40 to 50 years, the corruption has taken so much hold on it. Now they're trying to fight their way back. The new president is President Macri, and I know Macri reasonably well, and he's fighting his way through this. He's fighting his way. Really fast story about corruption. We built a power plant in Argentina. And I was down there, and I saw the president, and we're having this great meeting, and he said, so what can I do to help you? And I said, well, I'll tell you what you're going to do to help me before it happens, so you know I told you. He says, what's that? And I said, I'm going to get stuck at customs. I'm going to get stuck at customs, and a really big hand is going to go out, and I'm not going to pay it. And I'm going to get delayed by months and months and months because I won't pay off the customs people. And he says to me, well, if you have a problem, let me know. We had a $100 million problem. We wouldn't pay off the customs people. We got our equipment stuck in customs for approximately 9 months. They get their money one way or another, because if they're stuck in customs, they take it over here and they put it in this holding yard where their buddy happens to own, so they get the money anyway. And I went back to see the president, and I said, Mr. President Macri, this is a big problem. And he says to me, John, I know I can't fix it. So corruption is a terrible, terrible, terrible situation. And it's immoral, it's wrong, it's morally reprehensible. It kills more deals than it will ever make happen. It's the bane of the African situation, the bane of the South American situation. It's the bane of Indonesia. It's the bane of the Philippines. I mean, it's an absolute plague. And the one thing we have is in America, a lot of American companies would complain and say, well, we're at a disadvantage because some companies can do that and we can't. Well, that's just fine with me, because if somebody's got their hand out, that's not the last time they're going to have their hand out. So there you go.
Well, wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing
Thank
your
you.
life story.